Story 1. Magical rubber duck. Turns whatever body of water it is in slowly into the perfect bath, as in warm and bubbly. Chucked it in a piranha pit. About 20 minutes later, the piranhas were all dead from poisoning via soap. Floaty rock. Rock that gains or loses buoyancy based on its temperature. As a warlock with prestidigitation and a rope, I could use it to hover and float very slowly. I had no way to steer, but it was useful when stuck in a pit or on a high place. Rat flute. Flute that summons a horde of rats like the Pied Piper. It can also be used to control any rat-like being, including a criminal known as the Rat, simply because he's a snitch. Had a lot of fun with that. Story 2. I gave my players a rock of gravity detection, which is exactly what it sounds like. They got it early on in the campaign, and when dropped, it would accelerate until reaching terminal velocity to the nearest center of gravity. So basically, it was a rock that would just act like a normal rock. Until way later in the campaign, they found themselves floating aimlessly through the astral plane, searching for the soul of another player trapped in a keep on a small chunk of land that had been previously transported to the astral plane. They didn't have much to go on, as they were essentially floating in a void. Then one of my players pulled out the rock of gravity detection. I tried to argue that it's just a rock, so it just floats there, but due to what I thought was clever wording, my own wording, they argued it should accelerate towards the nearest center of gravity. Yeah, they found the keep. Story 3. A wand of lesser summon. Only bringing out local creatures in celestial form. Fish. They picked fish. Just throwing trout in stacks to trigger traps and such. Need to slow down your pursuer? Many fish. Need a distraction? Fish as thrown objects. I told them that it can summon literally any local creature. But on every character sheet was the word fish gun. Story 4. I gave my players an amulet that lets them speak to rocks. The one player who picked it up spent most of that session talking to his new pet rock and would often interrogate rocks they find at scenes for information, usually getting either vague info or stuff they can clearly see already, because it's a rock. Later on, another party member wanted to try talking to another rock, actually a pile of rocks made into a crude gravestone related to their character's backstory, only for the first party member to find out the amulet was cursed and they couldn't remove it. Later on, they got it removed and had the amulet identified, where I revealed that the amulet only let them think they could speak to rocks and all the information they had asked of rocks was only information that was already known to them. They basically started using the now uncursed version of the amulet as a tool to ask me for information they had forgotten or needed clarity on, but in character rather than just ask me out of character, which was great. Story 5. I homebrewed the hat of many hats. It's a regular hat, but it's made of shift weave, so it can have the appearance of any other hat. It was part of a shop selling dodgy knockoffs of regular magical items. In this case, the hat of disguise. The halfling who always struggled with role-playing took it, and it became a great way to get her more involved in what her character would do. It started when she transmuted herself in I'm with stupid baseball cap to tease one of the other party members after he had come up with some ridiculous plan, which led to one of the other players asking what this mysterious baseball was, and she just ran with it that it was a game they used to play back in her home region when they were kids. All of a sudden, she had a backstory, rather than just being, I'm short and I stab things. I'm sure she would have come into role-playing eventually, but it was like giving her a dressing-up box and seeing her realize that she could actually do things that weren't just purely mechanical. Story 6. Player, not Dungeon Master. I was given an article that only cast quicksand, which turned a certain volume of rock temporarily to quicksand. High-level characters, a bit of a gag gift. My halfling got it. A small army of orcs was approaching us. Narrow bridge. Dungeon Master expected a massive fight that was going to test our health points and empty magic items. Q central portion of stone bridge turning into quicksand and dropping into the gulf below, totally cutting off the orcs. We strolled off at leisure. Also known as how to get the Dungeon Master to blink in silent confusion for 3 minutes as his game ended hours early. Story 7. Tweezers of boat bottling. You have gained the ability to put ships into bottles with these tweezers. People were sneaking into dockyards at night and stealing entire fleets. And when the Navy finally caught on, they would sail away and toss said shrunken boats in bottles at the Navy boats following them, causing them to rapidly expand. Then they started to plan bottle boatception, putting bottled boats onto full-sized boats and then bottling that boat over and over again, effectively creating a dozen boats to rapidly expand in one town by tossing one bottle. I had to shut that down quickly. Story 8. In our very first session, the fighter just really wanted to steal from the quest giver's house, so I gave her an ornamental dagger that was basically useless outside of selling it. 10 sessions later, they used it as a gift to bribe their way into a royal wedding. Story 9. I gave the party a tiny bag of holding made of human skin. I don't remember why. They were trapped in a house fighting a zombie horde and they used the skin bag, turned it into a sort of Molotov bomb, and used a spell to have it fly over the zombies who followed the human skin away to be blown up. It was a 45-minute saga to get to that point, and it was easily the funniest and most creative moment I've seen from the Dungeon Master side. Story 10. We had a rock that, if you were knocked out with it, made you completely invulnerable while unconscious. You had to successfully hit yourself or someone else and take damage from being knocked unconscious by a rock to the skull. That rock caused so much chaos, death, and life, and permanent head trauma to non-player characters we were trying to rescue. Story 11. A random encounter in the woods got the players a crow mask that makes it so you can only call like a crow when wearing it, based on a Slay the Spire item. Can be removed without issue, so it is a silly flavor item. However, the players are convinced it is the secret MacGuffin of this campaign and keep trying to use it for everything. Most times are failures, but a few times the stars align and it somehow works. They used it to calm a weird mutated child down so that they could ask it questions to learn about an ambush. They used the spell Enlarge, along with the mask and a super high deception and performance roll, to convince a cult that the fighter was a stronger god than the one they were worshipping. They constantly use it to make every town guard think they are too much trouble to be worth hassling. Story 12. Gave the party a magic whistle that summons pigeons. The party somehow used it to murder an orc commander by turning his armor into bread, having the pigeons eat it all, and then shooting him in the face with a blast of lightning. Story 13. Healing Rock does 1 to 4 bludgeoning damage, but heals 1 to 4 plus 1 health points. It was supposed to be a funny way to bring characters back from unconsciousness by restoring a small bit of health points. Barbarians resist bludgeoning damage when raging. The Healing Rock became their go-to healing strategy for keeping the barbarian healed between fights. Story 14. I gave them a folding boat. Say a magic word, and the small shoebox magically expands into a boat. Not 5 minutes later, in real life, the rogue has thrown this box from the roof and said the magic word, creating the only instance of 20 dice rolls I've ever had to do. I don't know the rules as written or the rules as intended if this is allowed, but throwing a boat at people is too fun not to allow it. Story 15. Maybe not exactly what you were looking for, but I've been looking for an excuse to tell this story. I had a party of a wizard, ranger, druid, summoner, and barbarian back in Pathfinder 1st Edition. All of the party members except for the barbarian had some kind of pet, be it an animal companion, familiar, or just the menagerie of animals the druid accumulated. A few sessions in, my barbarian sends me a text while the party is setting up camp. The barbarian volunteers to take a watch, and the next morning the rest of the party wakes up to the barbarian's new pet, Brock the Rock. Brock was a stone with eyes and a mouth crudely carved into him. Brock goes on adventures with the party and is mostly forgotten about until a premature fight with that arc's end boss. The boss wipes the floor with the party, leaving everyone unconscious except the barbarian who has single-digit hit points. Not wanting to have a total party kill, and with the boss in surprisingly worse shape than I expected, I have him taunt the barbarian and start to fly away. Brock is going to take his attack, the barbarian says, throwing his pet with all his might. Critical hit, max damage on the roll. The boss drops to -1 hit point and faceplants at the barbarian's feet for the coup de grace, also performed by Brock to finish what he started. And that's how our party's pet rock gained a temporary flight speed of 40 feet and favored enemy for both sorcerers. Story 16. One time our dungeon master gave us a rod of summon boat as a joke, except we rolled a natural 20 for the summon and got a whole galleon. The campaign quickly became pirate-themed as we became privateers. Story 17. We acquired a brick mold along with some other basic tools when we found a workshop in a dungeon. It was supposed to be just some set dressing, but I took it anyway. We later used it and several more we made from its design to reinforce a village that would soon come under attack. With everyone in the village making clay bricks for 2 weeks straight, we had enough to build a wall tall enough to make one of the ways into the town rather protected so we could focus the fighting on the other entrance where we could have more manpower at once. It saved a lot of lives since we weren't able to be flanked. Story 18. One of the players had gotten married to a pretty young non-player character who wasn't an adventurer. So I gave him a ring of conjugal visits that would transport him to his wife for an hour, then send him back to the adventuring group. The ring worked twice a week and was intended as a joke. When the party was beaten up from a hard combat, he used the ring and asked his wife where the nearest temple was, then bought healing potions from the local cleric. Soon this became a thing. Cure disease, healing, whatever. The ring became this guy's quick trip to the pharmacy, although he also always found a few moments for a quick moment with his wife. Eventually, he woke the cleric up at 3 a.m. to buy more potions. So I had the cleric throw a fit and yell at him never to come back. The player went back anyway, and the next time, there was a bouncer at the temple door telling him to get lost. Story 19. A gray bag, which was stuck on rats. They abused it so much in one session, I created a huge rat god that came and attacked the party. It wasn't that they were overusing the item, it was that they were using it poorly. At one point, they were pulling rats out and killing them in order to use their blood as dye. Story 20. The jar of endless lard. I put it in as a joke, and somehow they managed to set a forest on fire with a timed fuse. Also, having them cover various body parts in the lard just to set it on fire for extra damage wasn't good. Story 21. I gave my players a torch that couldn't be lit by normal means. After 2 or 3 sessions, one of them finally asked how to light it. I had totally forgotten about it by this point, so I made the non-player character mention that it could only be lit by an Elder Red Dragon's breath weapon, and once lit would burn forever. Suddenly, the entire party of 3rd and 4th level characters decides they want to veer off course and get this thing lit. Story 22. My party were camping in a barn and made friends with a goose. I allowed them to take the goose with them as a guard goose and emergency food. During their dungeon crawling, they found a gold bracer. The cuff was a soulbound item that would randomly cause whoever wore it to be possessed by a Lich King. The idea was that the next quest would involve removing it from the affected party member. After thorough inspection, the party discovered an evil aura surrounding the cuff, so they put it on the goose. The theory was that since the goose was chaotic neutral, it would balance out the evil of the bracer. Now they had a chaotic neutral guard goose that would randomly be possessed by a neutral evil lich, take on the appearance of a zombie goose, and cast random spells through a series of honks and hisses. Story 23. They got a vaguely sword-shaped branch of ash wood. That was it. This was in a planescape setting, so a few hours later the sorcerer persuaded an apologetic genie that the adjectives were unordered, so it was in fact a sword shaped like it was vaguely a branch of ash wood. To make amends for destroying part of the party's inventory, the genie remade the sword per the sorcerer's description while under a compulsion of truth. So was born Sylvan Blade. Story 24. I gave my players a chalice that, when drunk from, caused the user to sweat fat profusely. They used it to overcome a cold-based trap in the dungeon. It was a hallway that got progressively colder. So they emerged on the other end, covered in fat, into the chamber of the dungeon boss. It was a slippery fight. Story 25. My favorite magic item my players found was a completely homebrewed item with no real practical function, but they still got creative with it. They found the pie stone. Holding this stone in your hand and concentrating will fill a 25-foot radius area with the stone as the center with the smell of a pie of your choice. This effect lasts for 10 minutes or until you dismiss the effect. The rogue used it to sneak past guards and as a distraction tactic when scouting and such. Story 26. Not a dungeon master, but in the last campaign I was in, the dungeon master gave us a regenerative oasis that only appears to people who need it. The party was messing around, throwing bones in it and bringing the animals they belonged to back to life. One of the other players had the idea to throw the hat of the deceased king into the water, and brought the king back to life because of a single hair. The dungeon master hadn't even considered that possibility, because the session was supposed to be our beach episode. Story 27. Not mine, but the question reminded me of this post by a user named Nickoberg. I created a non-player character werewolf that was supposed to be a major villain in the campaign and stalk the players. It was a higher level than the player characters, so the idea was that they would need to flee every encounter and take measures to avoid being followed. Having someone on their tail constantly tracking them that could and would actually kill them was supposed to inject a sense of urgency into the game. On the first encounter, the werewolf was shown methodically slaying a large group of town guards and a high-ranking paladin. The characters were around level 5, the non-player character was probably challenge rating 12, and would scale as they leveled. They interrupted the combat, and the idea was that they would attempt to fight the werewolf, who didn't consider them a threat initially, and so wouldn't just murder the whole party, see it killing a high-level character, and go, "Oh no, we need to run from it," while it slaughtered the rest of the guards. At first, they rush in to help and attack the werewolf, doing little damage because they don't have silver weapons, and I gave this particular non-player character a regeneration ability only stopped by silver. I have the werewolf attack one of the players with a secondary bite attack, which should put them to fairly low health without killing them outright. That player pauses for a moment and then asks if he can try to block the attack with his hand. I'm not sure what he's getting at, but I humor him and say he can do that with a difficulty check 10 dexterity check, although it won't affect what kind of damage he takes. He succeeds. He then asks if he can jam his hand into the werewolf's mouth. I say sure, but he's probably going to bite it off and you'll need a new hand. He says, "Even better." I described the werewolf doing so. The rest of combat continues until the player's turn, who seems undisturbed by the loss of a hand, and on his turn he says, "I activate Quail's feather token to make a tree. This token is a magic one-time use item that creates a 5-foot diameter, 40-foot high tree. It's a handy utility item that our playgroup was fond of. Previously we'd used it to do things from just making bridges and crossing walls to providing a druid with a way to use a particular spell in plantless areas that require trees. It didn't seem to have much use here. I ask him where on the board he's activating it. He points at the werewolf. I say that the most that's going to do is knock the werewolf prone, and he gets a fairly easy save to prevent that. He smiles. "No, it's in the werewolf." "What? How?" "I was holding it when he ate my hand." Me and the rest of the party are kind of silent for a second. I'm trying to think of a valid reason why this won't work. I fail. The werewolf now has a 5-foot wide tree growing out of him. The fact that he has regeneration doesn't particularly help when little bits of him are plastered on walls 20 feet away. The entire party celebrated, and they got a reward from the town and an ally in the paladin who was supposed to be dead. I had to make a new non-player character. Clever players are awesome,